I wake up, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you. When I go out, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who goes along with you. If I get drunk, well, I know I'm
Oklahoma drops its third game in a row. That's 4 out of the last 5 now for the Sooners, a team that has yet to reach bowl eligibility, sitting at 4-4 on the season. That's just one of the many things we've got to talk about from Oklahoma's 26-14 loss at Ole Miss. Caleb, let me ask you this. If I would have told you that Oklahoma was going to put up over 300 yards of offense on Ole Miss, score 14 points in the first half, and then hold the Rebels to less than 70 yards of rushing, would you have picked them to win or lose this game?
Knowing this offense going into the game, I
Right?
would still have picked them to lose.
Well, those are some of the basic stats there. Oklahoma with 24 first downs, 8 of 18 on third down, 329 total yards of offense, 182 through the air, 147 on the ground. Turnovers, man, 2 turnovers, and that continues to be a killer. And it's one of those things where the tide has turned, so to speak, where the offense is giving the ball away and the defense isn't really getting it back. And there was, one turnover that Oklahoma's defense came up with. And it really was a situation where the offense got the ball back. So I don't know, man. We've got so much to break down here, but it looked like in the first half, okay, they've got some life. And I don't know how you felt. The opening drive where Ole Miss goes down the field and just scores, I'm sitting there thinking, 21-point spread's probably going to get covered today, even though I officially did not pick the Sooners to get blown out. The way that game opened up, the defense just didn't have answers. Then the offense comes out and knocks on the door. Ole Miss does the goal line stand, if you will. But it was enough, I think. It was enough of a drive for Oklahoma's defense to say, wait a minute, this is different. I mean, did you get that sense? Because after that, the defense kind of kicked in there for the rest of the first half.
Yeah, that first drive, it looked very, very. I remember watching it thinking, well, this game is over faster than I thought it was going to be. But then next thing you know, Oklahoma's right down in the red zone. I know I saw a lot of people on Twitter mad that we didn't take the points. I personally like the call.
I was
You're
one of
on the
those
road.
people who was mad you always take points on the road, in my opinion.
I feel like you're on the road. Your offense is struggling. It kind of found a rhythm. Um, I liked going for it, trying to kind of show your defense, hey, we mean business. And, they hats off to Ole Miss for making those halftime adjustments.
Yeah.
Um, I know we're kind of get into the offensive breakdown here in a bit, but I get that we still lost, but it's I feel it feels promising. 1 week under Joe John, this offense looked night and day difference.
Mm-hmm.
I get they still put up 14 points. Excuse me. But if you told me this time last week Oklahoma was going to score 14 points, I would have think it'd have been early touchdown and a garbage time touchdown or a defensive touchdown. Not that Oklahoma's offense was going to put up 300 total yards of offense and have 2 touchdowns. It's promising. That's all I'm going to say. There is a lot to be built on the next few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, look, I get that, and I agree with you. I don't want to take away from the improvement on the offense. I don't want to take away from the things that the defense did against a very potent Ole Miss offense, but that not going for a field goal, in my opinion, was an egregious mistake, an egregious error. The offense had success. they were finding success. And it was evident on that opening drive that they were doing things differently. They were catching Ole Miss off guard. They kind of had the Rebels on their heels. You take the points. You're down by 7. It's 7-0. You take those points. It's 7-3. In the grand scheme of things, you're still going to lose this football game, but maybe not. I mean, you go into the locker room up 17-10 as opposed to 14-10, and it's just a different vibe. And so I hate it when you leave points on the board on the field. To me, that's a turnover, but I don't blame the offense for that turnover. That's a coaching decision that could have been 3 points. Again, you lose by 12 in a game that you were a 20 to 21 point underdog, depending on which service you looked at. But it could have been just a different vibe than what it was. Ultimately, I think what cost Oklahoma this game was the second half. The offense disappeared, and we'll talk about why that happened here in just a little bit. But you look at the implications of this game. Oklahoma's now 4-4 on the season. You got 4 games left. Tell me where the 2 wins are, Caleb. You got to get to 2 more wins to get to bowl eligibility. In fact, you got to get to 2 more wins to get back to year 1 of Brent Venables. I mean, you're at this point, you're just trying to get back to year 1 of Brent Venables. They were 6-6 going into that bowl game against Florida State. Are there 2 wins left on this schedule? And if so, where?
I think so. As long as the offense can keep building on the improvements we saw, I feel like this coming up week against Maine, that should be a win.
Mm-hmm.
And then at Missouri, I know it's on the road, it's going to be tough, but Missouri is not the team that everybody thought they were going to be. They're a team that should have dropped 2 to 3 more games this season, but they haven't. Give them credit for that. But I feel like, I know we've said this for a while, but if you can get a guy like Dion Burks, maybe a Nick Anderson, something like that back this week, start building on that momentum going into Missouri, I feel like it's promising to be able to walk into Missouri and pull off the upset.
I mean, the good news is, and I hate saying this, but Missouri's quarterback did go down on Saturday, and you don't know. I've not seen any prognostication on how long he's going to be out. I mean, one step at a time, right?
Yeah,
One step at a
absolutely.
time. So you got to focus on Maine next. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not. But you look at this schedule and you think about guys like Dion Burks and Nick Anderson and Jalil Farouk. You don't play against Maine. You don't play against Missouri. And for Jalil Farouk and Nick Anderson, you come back against Alabama, LSU in a bowl game. You can redshirt. Now, Dion Burks has to miss more time. Obviously, I think he got hurt against Tennessee. So he basically has played his 4 games. So hopefully you get him back as soon as possible because he's played in 4 games. But I mean, if you're Jalil Farouk and you're Nick Anderson, you don't come back against Maine, do you?
I I think it depends. Um, I think it depends on what they want to do. Farouk, definitely not. If he wants to come back, I don't think he comes back this week. But
If Farouk wants to come back, it's got to be. I mean, it's got to be Missouri or Alabama. Alabama, if he wants to play in a bowl game, you know.
no, the bowl game doesn't count towards redshirting.
Oh,
So
my
he
bad.
can they can both Anderson and Farouk can come back against Missouri, play out the rest of the season, and still get a medical red shirt. Dion Burks would have to come back against LSU and only LSU, because
He played in
or
4 games.
yeah, he played. So he that
Yeah,
doesn't
he
matter.
got hurt against Tennessee.
So he would have to be if he wants a medical redshirt, he would have to be done. I believe who else are we missing? Andrell Anthony. Again, he only played I think 1 game, correct?
Right, right.
So we can see those guys.
I think he played in the opener against Temple, but not much.
Yeah, I believe you're correct. Um, but it just depends, does Dion Burks, does he want a red shirt or not? Does a guy like Nick Anderson want a red shirt or not? He's already redshirted once, so he'd have to be a medical red shirt. Is he a guy that's, saw what his brother went through with all of his injuries? That's playing in the back of his mind. But I think if they're gonna want to come back and be contributors, this is the week that they're gonna come back. Just simply because they can go up against Maine the first game back instead of on the road against Missouri.
Yeah, see, I'm curious about that because obviously there's something, they say a deep tissue injury for Burks. I don't bring him back against Maine. To me, he's too valuable to play against Maine. You should be able to line up with Jacob Jordan and Bauer Sharp and those guys. Look, if Brennan Thompson can't get open against Maine, then it's time to start yanking scholarships. So
I feel like
go ahead.
the issue with Thompson's not him getting open, it's being able to have time to throw it to him.
Then run him shallow across. Don't run
Think
him vertical.
that's one of the points I was going to bring up a little bit later. I completely agree. But
But
to tell me
I
our
don't
most
think I don't think Thompson is running a vertical route every time. I think Thompson is getting jammed up and beaten by physical defensive backs.
it could be. Also, I just feel like we haven't really looked his way that much because of, his value is that deep route, and we just can't get the deep routes. But we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Well, Oklahoma's got to get 2 wins. I think you're right. The next 2 games are monumental. They've got to start with Maine. Then you get a banged up Missouri team that's kind of starting to see their season nosedive a little bit. Then it's Alabama and LSU, and I know this isn't the Crimson Tide of years past, but it's still the Crimson Tide. So they've got to figure some things out. You look at the top performers from Saturday for the Sooners. Jackson Arnold, 20 of 31, 182 yards, the 2 touchdowns, no interceptions for Arnold. There was the fumble where he just got blasted, and I don't really blame him. I mean, offensive linemen can't really get blamed for fumbles, but that was not on Jackson Arnold, in my opinion. I love the way they use Javante Barnes. We'll come back to that later on. 16 carries, 67 yards for Barnes, but also 5 receptions on the day, averaged 11.4 yards per reception using him out of the backfield. One of the things that you and I talked about was kind of getting some passes that would put Jackson Arnold in a comfortable area in terms of getting a rhythm for making the throws. And then I know he finished officially stat wise. Jackson Arnold finished low on rushing yards. What was it? My computer is deciding
He finished
not.
with 39.
Yeah, thank you, because my computer is just deciding not to cooperate with me right now. But if you take away the sacks, that's what I was trying to look at. If you take away the 9 sacks, or 10 quarterback sacks, excuse me, he's got over 100 yards rushing in this game. So I liked that. I liked what they did. I liked how they used Jackson Arnold. He did look comfortable. He looked strong. That last touchdown pass before the half was just a thing of beauty, where he stood strong, rolled out, fought off a defender, and then made a great read and a great throw. That was the best version we've seen of Jackson Arnold, was it not?
No, completely the best we've seen. And that's what we kind of assumed he was going to be. And that's when the offense was rolling. That's when the offense was kind of had that rhythm. Um, and you talk about fighting off a defender. He fought him off twice. He
Mm-hmm.
avoided getting sacked twice. And there was a couple times where he was a shoestring tackle away from scoring in that game.
Right.
And the offensive line got absolutely whooped. And the one thing I do want to point out is, you said it in our group chat, when Jake Taylor went down, that is one room that you cannot see
Mm-hmm.
injuries. And I think it was Gabe Eicher tweet. Did you see his tweet about the sacks?
Yeah, and I have all the respect in the world for Gabe Eichert. I look, I disagree with him because he's not counting all 10 sacks. And I disagree with him. I mean, look, a quarterback sack is a quarterback sack. Just because you don't agree with the stat doesn't make it incorrect. That's like me saying, well, I disagree with the interceptions. I don't think those were fumbles or whatever. A quarterback sack is a quarterback sack. And again, while I have a ton of respect for Gabe Eicher, that dude has forgotten more about the game of football than I will ever know. I disagree with him on that.
About, but what part are you talking about?
Well, he says that he doesn't count all 10 sacks. So if you look at the tweet that you're about to talk about the what was it, 5 sacks in the last few minutes of the game?
Hmm.
If you look at what he says, they gave up 1 sack all game long, and then 5 in the last, whatever few minutes it was when Oklahoma just had to throw the ball to have any hope of survival. That's only 6 quarterback sacks. There were 10. Jackson Arnold, look at the stat. That's right there in front of you. Jackson Arnold was sacked 10 times on Saturday. But Gabe Eicher says he doesn't count all of those because they were maybe designed quarterback runs or they weren't true sacks, true pressures. At the end of the day, it's a quarterback sack. And so your quarterback is getting taken down behind the line of scrimmage. That's a sack. And so I get what Gabe is saying. And to me, it's not good that if it's an obvious passing down, your quarterback is going to get sacked. That's just basically what he's saying. But to say that they only gave up 1 quarterback sack until the last 4 minutes of the game, I don't agree with that. That's not true. They gave up 5.
That is not the tweet I was talking about, and it might have not been Gabe Eichert.
My
Now that I'm
bad.
looking at it,
You see what had
uh,
happened was
I'm trying to find it now. I know I liked it, but it was the offensive line production with and without Jake Taylor.
oh, okay, my bad. So I went on a whole rant about
Yeah,
something
whole
complete.
different. Yes.
Okay, well, I mean, I stand by what I said.
Basically, what it was is like the I think in the first half before Jake Taylor went down, they only had like 1 sack or 2 sacks. And then
Mhm.
after Jake Taylor went down, that is when and you watch it, go back and watch the first half. The offensive line was day and night difference. And I get it, offensive line has not been great. I don't know the extent of Jake Taylor's injury. Um, but all I'm saying is I hope it's nothing serious because you saw a drastic dip in the offensive line performance
Mhm.
with and without Jake Taylor.
I agree with that. I agree, and that's. I mean, it is what it is. And kudos to Jake for. I thought it was Jacob Sexton though they got hurt.
Was it Jacob Sexton?
Yeah, and he tried to come back into the game, and it just couldn't go. But again, you and I both know what you're saying is true, whether it's Jake Taylor or Jacob Sexton. You can't lose guys on this offensive line, and it's just been a horrendous season in terms of injury for Oklahoma, regardless of the position. I mean, your top 5 receivers are down, your offensive linemen are down. And even before the injury, it was, I think, the 7th combination of offensive linemen that they've started this season through 8 games. So it's just, there are no answers. we're going to get to more offensive line talk here in a minute, but the short version is there are no answers for Bill Bedenbaugh. The tweet I was talking about from Gabe Eichert says this. He said 86 plays for Oklahoma's offense against Ole Miss. The offensive line gave up 1 sack in the first 76 plays. They gave up 5 in the last 10 plays of the game. And then somebody tweeted to him, I thought there were 10 sacks. Are you saying there were just 6 on the offensive line? ? And Gabe says, no, there were 6 sacks total. And then he goes on to talk about tackles for loss on the running play doesn't count as sack in my world. He says, in my world. He says there's still bad plays, obviously, but they're not sacks. And that's what I was talking about. Your quarterback gets taken down behind the line of scrimmage. That's a sack. I mean, that's what the stats sheet shows. And just because you don't agree with it doesn't make it different. And that's what I was going at. There were some positive things for Oklahoma on Saturday in the loss to Ole Miss, and I want to spend some time talking about that because I feel like therapeutically, Caleb, we do need to talk about the things that went wrong for the Sooners, but we also need to acknowledge that there were some positive signs that came that way as well. We'll get into that in the next segment. We've also got true or false coming up. Caleb's asking the questions, and then obviously we got to talk about what went wrong, and does this offense finally have an identity after just the first game with Joe John Finley calling the plays? Thanks for hanging out with us. This is the Sooner Nation podcast. So, Caleb, if I'm looking for positive signs for Oklahoma, despite the loss on Saturday, to me, it starts with the running game. The Sooners ran the ball for 147 yards, which was 80 more yards than what Ole Miss had been allowing opponents going into the game. The Rebels entered this game against the Sooners, allowing just an average of 66.6 rushing yards, which is number 1 nationally in the country. And Oklahoma had 125 yards on 30 carries in the first half of the game. And so if you're looking for signs of improvement, that's it right there. You're going to look at the strength of this defense and you're going to say, with the offensive line problems that Oklahoma has had this season, and you're going to say, we're going to attack right there, right at that strength. We're going right into them. And for 30 minutes of football, they found success. So that's a big win despite the loss. And I hate moral victories, but kind of that's all you have right now, right?
Yeah. And again, I feel like as we have watched this Oklahoma offense, we should be allowed to kind of take away this positivity that we're getting for the first time this season. This offensive unit has looked, I mean, we've been just complaining, talking what's going on, how do we fix it since Houston.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only gotten worse since then. You go to Tennessee, the Tennessee game, offenses look non-existent. Go to Auburn, you get a pick 6 that kind of wins the game. Then you go to the next 2 games in Texas and South Carolina, and it didn't, like, you take the offensive way,
Mm-hmm.
we win that game. We lose that game by less points both times.
Right.
And then you kind of come into the Ole Miss expecting the worst, and you get a offense who could play football just for a little bit. They had a great first half. They were really kind of showed just how shallow they are in rise of player depth. But you still are able to kind of take away the positive. Okay, this run game can be something.
Mm-hmm.
Javante Barnes can be something out of the backfield for Jackson Arnold. Jackson Arnold did a lot better job at taking care of the football. I
Right.
get that he had a fumble, but again, I'm not going to give credit to that fumble to him. He got absolutely blindsided and just got blew up. Like, that's 95% of college quarterbacks are fumbling that ball, if
Mm-hmm.
not more. So yeah, I feel like we can take away these positivities and kind of build onto him for the next couple weeks.
Sooners went north of the 300-yard mark in total offense And again, that's an incredibly stingy Ole Miss defense that they were playing. It's the first time Oklahoma had kind of crossed that 300-yard barrier. We've talked about that in previous episodes. First time they would have crossed that barrier since conference play began. So again, you and I talked about will they get to 300 yards of offense, and I think we both agreed no, they won't against this defense, but they did just that. And so you look at, to me, you look at those two stats, running the ball for 147 yards, getting more than 300 yards of total offense, and you look at the defense that they were playing, and that's enough to, if you were still on the fence, whether Seth Littrell was a problem or not, I think now you can fully say, look, the offensive line is broken. The wide receiver core is depleted. You've got a young, inexperienced quarterback. You've got an even more unproven quarterback behind him. You've got tight ends who can't block air. But Seth Littrell was the primary issue because Joe John Finley got things out of these guys against a really, really good defense that Seth Littrell hasn't been able to get.
Yeah, and I mean, I just felt like they played with more confidence with Joe John leading the way.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that it wasn't perfect, it wasn't great, it wasn't the Oklahoma standard, but it's something to build off of. It's
Yeah.
something to look at and like, oh, hey, that's a little bit different. Hey, this team is responding differently. And again, that's one thing we never saw with Seth Littrell calling plays.
Yeah, and something else we didn't see with Seth Littrell was the way the running backs were used, particularly with Javante Barnes. He was a dual threat weapon, not just a back, but he was a weapon. He ran the ball 16 times for a game high 67 rushing yards. He also caught 5 passes for 57 yards. And those 5 receptions, they tied a career high for him. The 57 receiving yards set a career high for him. I loved how they used Javante Barnes in this offense on Saturday.
Yeah, and it's something that going forward we need to see more of. We need to see these running backs being used, I don't used more out of the backfield because offensive line, I said a couple weeks ago it's going to get better.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not.
Right.
This is what the offensive line is going to play. So being able to hit those quick kind of dump downs, it's going to help open up the middle of the field for guys like Bauer Sharp in the middle, whoever else might be in the middle. And that's one thing we never saw. And I just like the creativity of the play calling a little bit more. You know, there was one formation where you had 2 backs and a tight end in the backfield. And I absolutely loved it because it showed, either way you want to run, you have a lead blocker. If you want to hand it off to, I think it was Barnes straight to the left, and then Taylor Tatum was behind Arnold. If you want to hand it off to Taylor Tatum, he's going to have 2 extra guys blocking for him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what we need with this offensive line.
Yeah, that was the old diamond formation. I think Kevin Wilson was the offensive coordinator who kind of got that going for the University of Oklahoma. I look, the creativity was there. You said on the podcast before the game that you wanted to see creativity. You saw it out of this offense in different formations, different sets, and then the way they ran the ball. I liked what they did. Now they're still very limited in the playmakers, and we'll get into that here in a minute, but offensively, I hate to say it, out of an offense that only scored 14 points, I was pleased with what I saw offensively. And then defensively, I don't think I know people are being critical about the defensive backs for Oklahoma, but again, this defense went toe to toe against one of the top offenses in the nation. And it's just not an offense that you're going to win every battle. They're going to take advantage of those shots. They're going to take advantage of busted coverages. They're going to take advantage of their physicality. But you and I You and I talked before the game, and we both agreed they've got to stop Ole Miss from running the football. That's got to be the priority for the defense. You stop Ole Miss from running the ball, and they did that. They held Ole Miss to 380 total yards, 69 on the ground, 2.2 yards per carry, which, if you think about it, 380 yards is almost 200 yards less per game than what the Rebels averaged. They're averaging 560.7, and 200 of those come on the ground. So 69 rushing yards to an offense that averages 200. I'll take that. I'll take that any day of the week. And you kind of knew that this defense it's going to be a give and take. You knew they were going to give up some yards. You knew they were going to take some yards. I think the biggest takeaway, though, is what I said going back to that opening possession. Ole Miss drives the field. The Rebels score. You kind of think, here we go. But the offense comes right back and shows life. And it's almost like you saw the defense take a sigh of relief and say, you know what, boys, we're not getting left out to dry this week.
I agree. And one of the things we talked about was, oh, you had to control the football. And if you look at that first half, that's exactly what this offense did. When the defense gave them the ball back, they took their time and they allowed the defense to rest. Go to the second half. I believe the first three drives were 3-and-outs. And that's just one thing you could not do. That's one thing we talked about. You cannot do. You cannot give this explosive offense more time with the ball. And we saw exactly why.
Mm-hmm.
They quickly made that game, 10 to 4 from 10 to 14 to 26 to 14, just like that. And this offense they lost that rhythm. They lost that, I don't really know what you want to call it, the mojo, the confidence, whatever you want to call it. And then that defense kind of went back to the, okay, this is on us, only on us type of mentality. And you saw that affect how the defense have played.
Mm-hmm. It did, but I think again, I feel like this was a really good offense. I mean, at 560 yards a game on average, that's insane. And so I don't know that I can put the loss on the defense.
No, I'm not saying the loss is on the defense. You got to score more than 14 points to win a football game.
Right.
You got to score more than just 2 quarters in a football game. You got to be able to stay consistent. And this is one thing this Oklahoma offense just lost that second half. I get that they're banged up, terrible offensive line, got even more banged up. But they came out, and I just kind of felt like Joe John got a little bit comfortable with the play calling, and I hope that he learns from that mistake. Because we saw that the play calling from the first and second quarter and the fourth quarter were completely different than in the third quarter. I'm not exactly sure if that was scripted like that, if that was the way the game plan was, or it's just hey, we can't do anything we're doing in the first 2 quarters. Let's try this instead. I I'm not sure what happened there, but I just hope that whatever that is, Joe John learns. And that's one thing we never saw from Seth Luttrell.
Mm-hmm.
It's things weren't working. Let's just keep doing the same things. Things weren't working. Give credit to Joe John for trying to change it up. And then he went back to what wasn't working, and made it work again.
Well, give me one guy on each side of the ball. Where we're talking about the positives, because we're going to jump into true or false in the next segment, and then we're going to kind of talk about the negative after that. But give me one guy offensively, one guy defensively that you could say this was the best part of that side of the ball on Saturday.
I mean, I think for the offense, you have to go Jackson Arnold. Kid was benched a couple weeks ago against Tennessee, comes back, really plays his heart out for this team.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we talk about take away those sacks. He's at 100 yards rushing and 100 yards throwing. quarterback hasn't done that since Jalen Hurts. He kind of looked completely different, and I hope he can continue to improve. And for defense, I mean, you got to go with the man Danny Stutzman, right?
Yeah,
That
I agree. Go ahead, keep going.
I mean, just 9 total tackles, 4 solos, 1.5 tackles for loss. I mean, he was the heart and soul of this defense. I believe you set his over under at double digits tackles, and I said under.
Yeah,
He was under that,
barely though.
but and it's not from a lack of him not hustling, but he was fighting off double and triple teams and still got 9 tackles.
Yeah, I agree with Danny. I agree with Jackson Arnold. I do think you got to throw your hat tip your hat to Javante Barnes again, just the way he was used dual threat, and hopefully they keep using him that way. It's going to be interesting, man. I mean, it's just going to be interesting because we're finishing a second consecutive year where the running backs just haven't been solid. I mean, everybody thought this was going to be Gavin Sawchuk's team coming in, yet another year of injury for Gavin Sawchuk. And now Taylor Tatum's rising up. This is going to be an interesting offseason, I think, for Oklahoma in terms of transfer portals, guys going in and guys coming out. We got true or false coming up. And then we're going to kind of have to get into some of the bad on Saturday. We'll finish up talking about the identity of this Oklahoma offense. This is the Sooner Nation podcast. Thanks for hanging out with us. Okay, it's time for true or false. This is the part of the podcast where Caleb is going to throw out a statement. I'm going to tell you whether it's true or whether it's false. You've got 5 statements this week. Oklahoma loses number 3 in a row. I'm scared, brother. I'm scared. Let's do this.
The first one is, I think it's pretty simple. It's pretty easy one, but Joe John should have had been the straight up offensive coordinator instead of co-offensive coordinator to start the season.
Okay, man, this is going to lead me into a rant. Can you give me a mini rant?
Let's go for it.
Okay, false. Now, look, Seth Littrell didn't work. He didn't work, and it took me longer than it should have to get on board with that. But the idea that Seth Littrell should have never been the offensive coordinator because he was fired previously is a flawed and almost ignorant argument. Let's talk about the coaches that have beaten the University of Oklahoma, just in the last month. So start with Steve Sarkisian, fired. Josh Heupel, fired. Just last Saturday, Lane Kiffin, fired. Lane Kiffin's been fired in the NFL and in the college football ranks. So the idea that a guy can't do his job and should have never been considered because he was fired previously is a very flawed and very bad idea. Now, did that mean it worked out? No, it didn't work out. It was a bad hire for Brent Venables, and it's going to send Brent Venables back. He loses clout. He loses credit. People want his job now, but none of that means it should have been Joe John Finley from the start. Seth Littrell had the better resume. He had the better experience. It didn't work, and it didn't work because Seth Littrell wouldn't let it work. But the reality is we can't keep saying Seth Littrell should have never been on this staff because he was fired. If you're going to say that, then stick to your guns. Steve Sarkisian should have never been the coach at the University of Texas. Josh Heupel should never been at Tennessee. Lane Kiffin should never be at Ole Miss. I mean, the dude was fired from Tennessee. He was fired from the Raiders. Guys can get fired and change their ways. Seth Littrell didn't, and it was a bad hire, but doesn't mean that Joe John Finley should have been the guy from the get-go.
Okay, I think you went totally different directions from what I was meaning by that.
I don't know what you meant by it. I mean,
I just meant by based on what we saw offensively on Saturday versus what we've seen all the rest of the season.
They did better. I mean, Joe John did better with what he had to work with on Saturday than what Seth Luttrell has had to work with this season. But I'm sorry. I agree. Seth Luttrell should have been fired. I'm there. I was there after South Carolina, fully on board after South Carolina. But I guess Sooner Nation's on edge, and I'm right there with them, I guess. Let's go to number two.
All right, number two, we have at least one more win if Joe John is calling plays from since the start of the season.
I actually thought about this. I think it's false because I don't know who they would have beaten. They weren't going to beat Tennessee. They weren't going to beat Texas. And South Carolina just dominated Oklahoma up front. I think their games are more competitive. Particularly South Carolina and Texas. They're more competitive. If Joe John has a chance to call the plays, I still think ultimately they lose those games. So I don't know. The 4 losses they have, I don't know which one. Which one would they, of the 3 before Joe John called plays, which one do you think the player personnel was on the field was good enough to beat the opponent? I don't see it.
I disagree a little bit, but I'll come back to that after my third true or false because it
Okay.
kind of ties in.
All right, let's do it.
True or false? Jackson Arnold looked more comfortable in the Joe John offense.
Oh, that's 100% true. And I think it goes back to, look, I don't want to pat ourselves on the back here, but it wasn't rocket science what we said that Joe John needed to do, which was simplify, simplify, simplify. And if you watch the broadcast, they talked about the fact that, exactly what you said, Caleb. Joe John Finley sat down with Jackson Arnold and said, what are you comfortable running? Like, what do you feel most confident about? And let's go with that. Let's build on that. And so it's crazy that it took this long into the season for someone to have that conversation. And I think you could probably do the same thing with Michael Hawkins and get a better result as well. But Jackson Arnold apparently was at the University of Oklahoma after Jeff Lebby left because of his connection to Seth Luttrell. And it doesn't sound like Seth Luttrell really had a lot to do with the quarterbacks and never had that type of conversation with Jackson Arnold. So, yeah, he definitely looked more comfortable, in my opinion, running Joe John Finley's offense as opposed to Seth Luttrell's. I agree with that.
I think that just going back to the second true or false, I do think that Tennessee and South Carolina are completely different outcomes if Joe John is calling plays, simply because the offense just seems to respond different to him. You have a more confident quarterback who's going to make better reads, make the easier reads, and for that, just that alone, I feel like we can get at least one more win between South Carolina and Tennessee. I agree. I don't think we were beating Texas, and it very well could be we could have beat Texas.
No.
But I'm just saying, I think either both were at least one, Tennessee or South Carolina, is the win in the Joe John offense.
Your best shot, in my opinion, would have been South Carolina because the way Oklahoma's defense really played that game. But the reality is Oklahoma was whipped up front in that game. The last 2 weeks, the Sooners, you realize they've set a school record for back-to-back weeks with sacks. I don't see how. I don't see how they could have beaten South Carolina. But I mean, everybody has their opinion, and that's what makes things like the internet and Twitter and websites and podcasts fun because everyone gets to share their varying opinions. But I don't see it.
So we've talked a lot about the offensive line. So my fourth true or false is the younger guys need to start playing on the offensive line. We have seen week in, week out that these older guys who aren't going to be on campus next year, they don't know what they're doing. I don't know if you saw the picture on Twitter where all 5 offensive linemen is blocking the same guy while 3 Ole Miss defenders is free shot at Jackson Arnold. Have you seen that picture?
Yes.
So tell me why a guy like Eugene Brooks or Pierre Louis, why they can't be thrown in there? Is it
I think
is
as
it
you go ahead, keep going.
is it because they're not physical enough? Because I haven't seen any physicality from this offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know the blocking assignments. Does this offensive line know the blocking assignments? Is it because you're trying to redshirt?
I think
If
there's something right there.
if Eugene Brooks and Eddie Pulier Louis are as good as they are being talked about and as good as we think, they're not going to be here more than 3 years. So redshirting doesn't matter. Look at Creed Humphrey is a perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was a starting center for Oklahoma for I think 2 years, and that was it. Guys like that are not going to be on campus for the red shirts to matter.
Yeah. So I think the answer to this question is found in Jacob Jordan, different position, but you realize Jacob Jordan is Oklahoma's top wide receiver the last 2 weeks. A scout team walk-on player has been Oklahoma's top receiver. The reason I'm throwing that out there is because they saw this kid in practice. They saw the connection he had with Jackson Arnold, and they're like, let's give him a chance. I mean, let's just give him a chance. He's earned it. That tells me that no one else has earned it, Caleb. I mean, the guys are out there busting it in practice and earning their way on the field. And the two position groups that have been completely decimated this season are the receiving core and the offensive line. And if a guy like Jacob Jordan can earn his way on the field, you'd think some of these other offensive linemen, if they were doing it in practice, would get a shot. It tells me they're not doing it in practice. That's just my thought. That's all I know. That's all I can go on. But it's not like they're not looking for guys to get out there and make plays.
So are you saying false? You never said true or false.
I think it's false. I think it's false because those guys, if they were good enough to be on the field at this point, I think they would be on the field.
Okay. Last one, and I know we already kind of touched on this, but true or false? We make a bowl game.
Dang. I wasn't expecting this one. I'm gonna say true. I tend to be more of an optimist than a pessimist. There's 4 games left on the schedule. You got to win 2 of them. 2 of them are at home. One of them is on the road in Missouri. Cook is out for the Tigers. I say they do it. I say the 6-6 is how they're going to end the regular season, and that bowl game is going to be the determining factor whether Brent Venables has losing seasons in 2 of his first 3 years or winning seasons in 2 of his first 3 years. I say yes, they pull it off. They get to a bowl game.
You know what? I'm going to throw in a bonus one for you.
Oh, bonus. I like it.
True or false? Making a bowl game, it's more important to make a bowl game for those 15 extra practices than
Absolutely.
actually playing in the game.
No, it is. You're right because that's all that's right up in the transfer season. And sometimes you can get guys that come in for the spring semester, depending on when your bowl game is, and they can go through those bowl practices and get those extra. It's almost like an extra spring practice for those guys who are going to be on campus for spring practice. So yeah, that's absolutely true. The practice time, the development time, the time to really show off and show out for next year, to set yourself up for spring. That's the most important part. And with an expanded college football playoff, it's even more important. The bowl games are basically an exhibition game now. It's a preseason game like the NFL would have, except for it's in the postseason. The bowl games mean squat unless it's part of that 12-team playoff. But those practices mean a whole lot. Are we done? That's it?
Yeah, that's all I got for you.
All right. Well, let's talk about what went wrong on Saturday for the Sooners. And we spent the first half of this podcast talking about some positive signs and so forth, but there is some bad. I mean, there's some bad to be spread out there, and I think it's going to be this way for the next 4 weeks as well. But Oklahoma changed the play caller, but they still have the same players, and that reared its ugly head on Saturday. They still have the same injuries. They still have the same weaknesses. The Sooners turned the ball over twice. They gave up 10 quarterback sacks, and they committed 7 penalties for 71 yards. There's still plenty of mistakes to be passed around amongst the player personnel on the field. And that's the thing that you and I don't fully see eye to eye on this, but I don't blame coaches for penalties. I don't blame coaches for turnovers. I certainly, don't blame coaches for busted plays because a guy's got to know. He's got to know what he's supposed to do when he gets out there. The offensive line it's not getting better. I was late to come around on Seth Littrell. At least admit to me that you're late to come around on the offensive line.
Yeah, and I think part of it goes back to typically an offensive not line needs a couple weeks to kind of gel. But the thing we haven't seen is a consistent offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like what'd you say? The eight different combination we got thrown out there Saturday?
Right. It's the seventh.
Seven. So
Yeah.
in 8 games, we've had 7 different combinations of starting line. An offensive line can't get better
Mm-hmm.
if they don't know who's going to be next to them week in, week out. So yeah, I would 100% agree that I was late on that just because I simply thought, oh, we got our start. This is the starting lineup we had in fall camp. This is going to be where it starts to kind of gel and mesh, and that just hasn't happened. And I don't think it's going to happen.
No, I can't. I just don't see how it happens. And now you throw Jacob Sexton's injury back in there. We don't know for sure what the detail of that is going to be. Jackson Arnold has been sacked 17 times, Caleb. 17 times he's been sacked in the last 2 weeks alone. It's just, I've been saying it since before Texas. This is what you're going to get from this offensive line. They're just bad. They are atrocious. And when you talk about, something you said was Joe John Finley kind of maybe got comfortable, not going away from what was working. I have a different take on that I'm going to get to in just a minute, but it comes down to the offensive line. Before we go back to that, though, let's talk about Bauer Sharp for just a second. A career high and game high, 8 receptions, a team high 53 receiving yards, notched his second touchdown reception of the season, the 6th of his career on the 11-yard touchdown play in the first quarter that opened up Oklahoma's scoring for the game. But the problem is he's a complete liability in terms of blocking. You've got to have somebody out there, and I've said this, and some of it's hard to say it with a straight face, but it is truth. The tight end position in terms of productivity has been an improvement over 2023. It's the only position on the offense that's giving better numbers than the position did last season, but they complete liability. Bauer Sharp can't block air. And so you limit yourself by having the guy on the field, but you also limit yourself if you don't have him on the field. It's quite the conundrum. And then you look at guys like Davon Mitchell. Where's these younger guys? Where's Caden Helms? And again, you got to think if they were better, if they could do it at this point, they would be on the field.
Yeah, and it's not just Bauer Sharp that can't block. You have what's the other tight end? Jake Roberts. He can't catch or block. And then you go, I've had a lot of people text me, a lot of people talk to me about, where's Mitchell? Where's Mitchell? The kid can't even figure out what color pants to wear to practice. That's the issue with him. He has not figured out how to play college football yet. So we're not going to see him this season. So Bauer Sharp is the tight end you're going to have to lean on. But like you said, he can't block air. There was one play, I think it was on the fumble where Jackson Arnold got destroyed. He was supposed to pick up the defensive end, but ran 2 miles ahead of him. Just completely missed him. Wasn't even close to touching him. And you can see kind of in Bauer Sharp's face, like, oh crap, I was supposed to, shove him, do something to kind of stutter that defensive end, but instead that defensive end just comes off the ball untouched.
Mhm.
And can we go back with the play before that fumble to talk about the double fumble?
Oh
Because
yeah.
that was pretty amazing. I went from screaming no to screaming yes to screaming no in 2 plays.
Right.
It
Because
was
because yeah, because Arnold just gets blasted on the very next play.
that was something that you looking at oh like okay, we fumbled but we got it back. This is a huge step in the right direction for Oklahoma offense, and then Jackson Arnold just gets demolished.
Yeah, and that was the only turnover that Oklahoma ended up getting from the Rebels on Saturday. And then again, it's just what happens to this team. You get a break, you literally get a break, and then immediately you give the ball to the other team. And we've seen that play out so many times this season. But sticking with the pass catchers, next to Sharp's 8 catches was Jacob Jordan with 6 catches for 38 yards. Now, he did catch his first touchdown as a Sooner and actually gave Oklahoma the 14-10 lead going into the locker room. Over the last 2 weeks, Jordan has caught 12 passes. And it's a great story because he's a walk-on player. And 3 weeks ago, this dude was running with the scout team. So I'm sure at some point there's going to be one of those crazy videos that come out where he gets surprised with the scholarship because let's be honest, he has earned it. But honestly, let's pause and realize that this is a receiving core that has Nick Anderson, that got Deion Burks, that has Andrel Anthony, that had Jalil Farouk. It's just Brennan Thompson, J.J. Hester, and Oklahoma's leading receiver over the last 2 weeks has been a walk-on scout team player. That's not good. It's a good story if you're Jacob Jordan. It's a good story if you're Jacob Jordan's family or one of his homies. But if you're talking about the productivity of your team, the fact that this guy is your leading receiver over the last 2 weeks shows you how far this receiving room has fallen. And I actually put this out on social media, and people are, oh, Drake Stoops, he was a walk-on. Yeah, he was a walk-on. And good for him for what he did. I'm not saying Jacob Jordan's garbage. Someone even said, well, Baker Mayfield was a walk-on. Yes, he was. But Drake Stoops was never expected to carry the offense. And Jacob Jordan should not be expected to carry the offense when this receiving core was that deep. Do you remember how excited Oklahoma fans were when Brennan Thompson came to the Sooners? Were we excited because Brennan Thompson had potential, or were we excited because he came from Texas? Because this guy's not contributed. You kind of got irritated with me when I talked about J.J. Hester after the Auburn game, not contributing, not living up to what the expectation was. And that list goes on and on and on. Jaquez Pettaway hasn't been around since Tennessee. But Jacob Jordan, the scout team walk-on, he can go out there and catch passes. What is happening with this receiving core goes beyond the injuries to the 5 guys. Because Deion Burks, nope, he's out. He's not getting better. Jalil Farouk, he's out. Doesn't appear to get better. Nick Anderson, Andrel Anthony, they're out. But where is the development of J.J. Hester? Where is the development of Jaquez Pettaway? Where's the development of these guys that are supposed to be the next man up? It's not there to the point where Jacob Jordan is the guy catching passes now. And I know, I know we love our receiving coach. I know we love him. The guy can recruit. Can he develop talent? I'm not seeing that, Caleb. Are you speechless?
No, I'm just trying to think which way do I want to come at this first? Because you said it, keep the same energy. Are you keeping that same energy about DeMarco Murray?
Yeah. I said that 2 or 3 weeks ago when you were talking about firing I was like, there's nobody on this staff. There's nobody on this staff that is above the criticism at this point. I
I
think
mean,
it's
this
across the board.
this is what, year two of Emmett Jones?
Mm-hmm.
I think you give him a pass because
There's no passes, man. There's
the
no
the
passes.
your top five guys are out.
Mm-hmm.
You go to, I mean, if going back to the beginning of the season, if I were told you JJ Hester had to be the number one guy, how would you have felt?
I mean, look, if you tell me JJ Hester has to be the number one guy, I'm going to say there's problems.
Yeah, and the problem is the injury. Now you blame Emmett Jones, but JJ Hester's been on campus for what, 4 years now? He's had other guys. Jaquez Petaway, only a redshirt freshman. The rest of the guys in that room are freshmen. So you talk about time to develop. Outside of JJ Hester, he hasn't had time to develop those guys. The guys that he has developed are all the guys that are hurt. The guys that have
So,
had to
so
have
Brennan
surgery.
Brennan Thompson hasn't had time to develop.
Okay, that's the only. Okay, I forgot about
He's in
Brendan
his
Thompson.
second season. Where is Brennan Thompson? Jaquez Petaway hasn't had time to develop.
You about to tell me that
Jaquez Petaway's been here since the spring.
I just feel like with your top five guys out, you can't come say that there's a problem with development talent because we don't know that yet. Now, if we're talking about this time next year and the same issues, then yeah. But I mean, we weren't complaining about the receivers when they were healthy. But now that they're all healthy, we're going to complain about the receivers because the guys who weren't expected to play, the guys that weren't expected to be contributors, had to step up. And I don't see a reason to be coming after Emmett Jones after 2 years where go from the receiving core we had Brent Venables' first year to last year. I mean, we're gonna talk about a guy with development. Jaden Gibson couldn't catch a ball. Jaden Gibson had a I know we talked about only 13 catches last season, but he had a huge jump in productivity. Did he not? From year one to year two?
I mean, 13 catches from like what, 4? It's still it's not.
I mean, this is a guy that couldn't catch a simple screen pass and went to having one-handed catches in the back of the end zone.
Look,
I'm just saying, if you want to be critical on it, at least give him time for the guys that he has focused on, the guys that are supposed to be the contributors, to be able to come back and contribute.
okay, but think about what you're saying. Think it just this, and maybe it's the way I'm understanding what you're saying. You said the guys he had time to focus on. How long has Nick Anderson been injured? Because he hasn't played. He didn't play until the Tennessee game, and he only made a couple snaps. How long has Andrew Anthony been injured? Deion Burks, we know he went down at Tennessee. We know Jalil Farooq goes down in game 1. So you're telling me he only focused on those guys? Jaquez Petaway was a consensus 4-star, and he was a top 100 recruit. And here's the thing. DeMarco Murray's been on blast. In my opinion, he's been on blast in a lot of circles since Taway Walker transferred out. Taway Walker was like, man, we never knew week in and week out who was number 1, who was number 2, who was number 3. And it was supposed to be Gavin Sawchuk, but Gavin Sawchuk's not number 1 this year. And here's my concern. We want to keep these guys because they can recruit. And so we're like, oh, this guy's a great recruiter. Let's keep him. But when you recruit talent and you don't develop it, you become the Texas Longhorns from 2006 to 2019. That was the thing. I mean, Mac Brown, those Charlie Strong. I mean, follow the list of coaches that were developing high. They were recruiting high end talent, getting those guys to come and never developing them. So we're going to keep a guy because he can coach, or we're going to keep a guy because he can recruit. And that's just that's where I'm saying that you got to have some development. You've got to be able to have also, I think, some accountability. And let me throw one more thing out here. I know I ranted on that, and we can come back and have that conversation again if you want to. But the only other negative from Saturday, in my opinion, was that they couldn't adjust to the adjustments. And when you look at the success Oklahoma had early against Ole Miss, it was good, but then the Ole Miss made the adjustments at halftime. They're like, we're just going to take away the run. We're going to pressure the quarterback, and we're going to make him beat us. And Jackson Arnold didn't have the weapons to be the difference maker that Oklahoma needed him to be. Jackson, the offensive line couldn't hold its water. Jackson Arnold didn't have time. The receivers couldn't break routes and get open. And so there is positive here, but it's in a way that there's still a lot of work to be done. And they got to beat Maine. If you don't beat Maine, someone else has to get fired. But there's still a lot of you walk away from that with a moral victory, but you also look and you say, man, there's a lot of work to be done with this program. Well, we got one more thing to talk about. Let's take a quick break and then come back and close this out. All right, Caleb, look, I know I cut you off talking about coaches and development and players and all of that stuff, but we were up against a timeout. So let me give you, if you want it to be the last word on coaches and player development and the receivers and so forth. The floor is yours, sir.
This is it, and I'll be quick and simple with this. I just don't feel like we've had enough time to sit here and say, excuse me, to say Emma Jones can't develop talent. We don't know that yet. We can look at guys like J.J. Hester and Brendan Thompson as the only two guys that really, I mean, you can throw Jaquez Petaway in there. The guys that are the above excuse for not having development. But really, J.J. Hester hasn't been able to sniff the field his entire tenure at Oklahoma. Brendan Thompson, we don't really know what's going on with him. You know, it's like you said, were we excited because he came from Texas? Were we excited what he could do? I was excited because of his speed, and I just don't feel like we can utilize what his strong suit is because of how poor this offensive line is. And then for Jaquez Petaway, I mean, outside of Marvin Mims, when was the last time OU had a freshman receiver kind of pop off?
Nick Anderson.
That is very true. I forgot about Nick Anderson last year. But, I mean, the thing is, that doesn't happen very often.
Right.
And so I just feel like.
CeeDee Lamb was a stud, but he was before Marvin Mims. But
CeeDee Lamb his breakout was not his freshman year.
Oh, he was. Yeah, he had a good freshman year.
He had an okay freshman year.
He had that catch against UCLA. Wasn't that his freshman year?
That was his sophomore year.
Was his sophomore year?
Yeah. His freshman year was Baker Mayfield because he played with Baker Mayfield, and he hardly saw the field. He saw the field. But yes, his sophomore year was I believe that UCLA was the first game of the season, and he had that one hand grab that was an incomplete pass.
Right.
But again, that was his second year. Pettaway is a freshman, whatever you want to say. I think that you can kind of give Emmett Jones a little bit of leeway. Now, again, if the same things are happening next year, then yeah, I'm totally on board that he cannot develop talent.
Well, the problem is that the same things are happening next year. The entire coaching staff is getting fired. If they're sitting 4-4, 8 weeks into the season next year, I wouldn't expect Brent Venables to get year number 5.
I agree.
And so you gotta look across the board and you just gotta. I mean, look, you're right. Emmett Jones came from Texas Tech after the 2022 season. I don't think he gets credit. If you're not going to give him credit for the lack of development for guys like Jacquez Pettaway or even Brennan Thompson, then you can't give him credit for Drake Stoops, because Drake Stoops is already here. And that was, Drake Stoops was going out to Emmett Jones. The point I'm making is I think Brent's got to go through across the board and not just evaluate recruiting, but evaluate development. And are players developing? It could come down to just the injury situation. But man, it scares me that Jacob Jordan is the guy when you have all these other dudes with stars beside their name. Because guess what? Jacob Jordan came in with Jacquez Pettaway, and he's already made more plays than Jacquez Pettaway has. So that's the only thing that bothers me about it. We've got 3 minutes left. Real fast, Caleb. Joe John Finley simplified things with the offense. The Sooners scored 2 touchdowns in the first half. We haven't seen that since Auburn, 2 touchdowns and a half. The power run game, I believe, is going to be the identity of this offense for the last 4 weeks of the season, and hopefully a bowl game. The power run game to set up the passing game. That's what I think the identity is going to be. And I'm just excited that we actually get to have a conversation about what does this offense do. Well, they run the football. I think that's what they're going to do against Maine. That's what they're going to try to do against Missouri. That's who they are, in my opinion, after one game of Joe John Finley. Give me your final thoughts in the last 2 minutes here.
I mean, I agree. I think the way that we utilize Javante Barnes has to be kind of the stepping stone for this Oklahoma offense moving forward. I don't want to see it a whole lot against Maine, because I feel like we can beat Maine without seeing that. But that's something that is going to have to be continue to be developed, continue to see how else we can utilize not just Javante Barnes, but Taylor Tatum and Gavin Sawchuk whenever he gets back. And then simplify worked.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not to the point where I think we have to start throwing in complicated wrinkles. I don't think Maine is a good football team. I think Oklahoma can be even more simple than they were Saturday night and beat Maine pretty handily. And then you get to go into Missouri, same thing. Simplify. Control the clock. Control the ball. And I feel like you can pull off an upset. So simplify is okay. You don't have to get away from it.
Yeah, let's see what happens. Again, back to what we said in that opening segment, one game at a time. You beat Maine, you're at number 5. Then you got one game over the last 3 you got to win to get bowl eligibility. We'll be here to talk about it. We got Thursday night podcast coming up to talk about the main game on Saturday. Caleb, enjoy your week. Everybody else, enjoy your week. And hopefully they break the losing streak on Saturday. Boomer Sooner, everybody.
I'm gonna be the man